Dustin Apiric with us as usual. We're normally on Mondays, but thank goodness joined us today as we are welcoming J.D. Campbell in, co-hosting today, former IU Media Relations Director for Basketmen's Basketball and many other things. But thanks again, J.D., for sitting in with us, and Dustin as well for being with us. And this has just been fun for me, sitting here listening to you guys talk in all of this, because you guys have been around together more than I have. I was before and after, and there was a hole for me. I was gone, but there was just a lot. Like, I didn't know Zach was with the IDS. There's so many things that I still don't know after even being around for a while. It's funny the things you learn.
Just presume Zach has always been here. Like, there's never been a time when Zach Osterman didn't exist in IU Media. Oh no, I mean, think about it. He's been a part of it since like 2007.
Yeah,
I want to say somewhere in that.
It's interesting, Dustin, because if I looked at the group, I would say Pete DePremio, Mike Merritt, and Zach are the ones that probably have been with me just about every season that I've been here in some form or capacity.
Yes.
So the thing that I was going to talk to you about and tell you about the media is I taught a college sports media relations class for a number of years at IU. And one of the things people would say, well, explain the media now compared to what it was when you first started in 1987. And I said, imagine this, you're going home for Thanksgiving, driving to your home. And then when you come back on Sunday, every 12-year-old and above has a driver's license. I said, that's the media today. It is much younger. I do lament the fact, like what you talked about, cutting your teeth, I think, is really, really important in all this. More so than anything is you get to cover a coach, and all coaches, you know, they have different, you know, some will treat you like you're the prodigal son. Others act as though that they don't have time for you. And you got to learn to deal with those personalities and understand, as I always say, when I talk about one of my, you know, any of my former head coaches, and I was very fortunate that, you know, Mike really, you know, has been absolutely supportive of me. And then the three of the first people that reached out to me when I made my announcement, Tom Crean, Dan Dockich, Archie Miller. And I thought, well, you know what? If those guys respect me enough to reach out and wish me well, then I did my job. Right. You know, I had their confidence. And that's the thing that I think's always been one of my strengths, is being able to read them and create an environment that best suits them and how they want things done. And so, you know, that relationship with the coach is so important. And not only that, but the student athletes. I had 118 of them, you know, and how I would go about getting their confidence and getting to know them. And with a lot of them, it even extended to their families over the course of time. Right. And one of the things I would tell, I started meeting with some parents during Archie's tenure, you know, meeting formally. And I would say, congratulations, your son is now the worst scholarship player that's ever suited up for Indiana University. And the parents that had been there a year or two would be in there shaking their hand. Yep. They're just trying to explain to them, look, you know, understand where you're at. Do not react. If you have a problem, call me. Right. You know, and we'll talk through it. But you know, it can really be daunting for a lot of people who aren't used to you, because you know what it is in recruiting. Everybody is, you know, Larry Bird, Michael Jordan, who's going to be coming to play at whatever school it is. And there's nothing but love. But the moment that you get somebody blow by you and they score 25 points on you defensively, that's when people tend to go the other way on their feelings on particular kids.
No, I mean, from my perspective coming in and seeing what it was like, I mean, I remember getting started as far as the recruiting piece was concerned. So by the time I got in, obviously the Hulls, Watford, Elston, Bobby Capabianco class was set. Those guys were coming in. And so I got to see when Tom was recruiting Kyrie Irving, I remember Moses Abraham. Like the sort of little like 3-week obsessions in recruiting were hilarious. First off, I mean, it was just wild, especially to look back at, who hit and who didn't. Obviously Victor was interesting and everybody kind of knew him. He was a really good athlete. I mean, we talk about Victor like nobody wanted him. It wasn't that bad. But it was like he was a pretty kind of clean recruitment as far as, all right, 1 week he's a deal, not long after he's committed. Will Sheehy was sort of a under the radar deal too, but the guys they got obsessed with versus the guys that they didn't. And then, when they got there, or who's a bust or who's living up to it or who's not. And guys they wrote off after a couple weeks who ended up being really good players. And like, why isn't Christian Watford good enough yet? Well, so he's starting every game and he's still skinny and, and eventually he hits one of the most important shots ever. And yeah, the up and the down is huge because people live and die this. I mean, I think I was talking about, I was talking to Jim about this, and I was even talking on our podcast on the Indy Star, when it came to Trace and, him going to IU or not IU, like people are just so obsessed, like there is this desire, I think, among Indiana fans for a guy to grow up in Indiana, play high school ball in Indiana, go play at IU, be a star at IU, and then go to the Pacers and be a star at the Pacers. Like they want somebody who they can follow all the way through. And they go through ups and downs with them and everything like that. And they decide sometimes they're the worst player ever. And then they decide they're the best player ever. But they really do want all these guys there with them forever, for the most part. It's the amount of passion. It's a lot. It's a burden. It's got to be a burden on you. Obviously, it's certainly a burden on the coaches, I think, who have to live up to this ideal. It's not even just that you win, it's how you win, it's who you win with. And people get irked when it's somebody from out of state. But on the flip side, they will adopt you eventually. And number one, and number two, there is just such a passion and desire to care, and not everybody has that. And so it's sort of, what problem would you rather have? Would you rather have the fan base that's obsessed and then that you're constantly dealing with everything all the time, or would you have people that that are more chilled out and care less? And in a lot of cases, this is the good problem to have, certainly from a perspective in the media of moving the needle and having people read. This is the better problem to have. But I mean, they are scrutinizing everything you write, and in turn scrutinizing the heck out of the people that you're covering. I mean, I frequently feel like I've got to defend people, because they're, the commenters are more harsh than I ever am, as far as how I talk about players. I mean, like people be on comments like, this guy's a bum. I'm like, I really no, I don't even think that. Why do you think that? Like, you guys are way meaner than me, and I do this professionally. Like, come on now.
Well, I think when you talk about Sheehy and Oladipo, I know from firsthand the staff, took some grief from people in the state of Indiana because, people are, why are you bringing this kid in from DeMatha that didn't even start? Right. He willingly came off the bench, or Will Sheehy. And they ended up being two of the most important recruits, underrated, much like Juwan Morgan and OG Anunoby years later. Those guys, I remember the year we won the Big Ten title in 2016. OG didn't even get off the bench in the second game in Maui against St. John's. And Juwan went on the court, and I know he made a couple mistakes against UNLV. And to see where those guys came, how they developed and what they were, what two better guys do you want representing your program than OG and Juwan? Right. Thomas, everybody knew about, but those two guys, I don't think people realized the impact that they had on the program. And it was great to see, each one of those guys get a chance to cash an NBA paycheck.
Yeah. No, I mean, I like Victor and Will going back to them, because I remember OG being recruited and Juwan being recruited, and I think they were sort of in the beginnings of discussion when I left, or maybe not, or maybe I just watched it from a distance when I was in Tennessee. But I mean, like Victor and Will really set kind of the soul of that program, at the time. I mean, like that team doesn't take a leap without those two guys and the personality they had. And, Tom would always talk about how they were in the gym every day from the time they got there, like from the time they got in the building. And, they sort of, created this group with Jordy Hulls of like, these three guys are going to be in the gym every single day. Are you showing up with them or not? And it's like, are you following along with these guys or not? And that was sort of like, okay, this train is leaving, and, these guys are really the ones that are pushing it. And that sort of formed that culture. And so, and I remember I even talked to Tim Buckley about this a few years ago when I was doing an Oladipo kind of a retrospective for The Athletic. And he was just saying, like, we caught a significant amount of heat for going to get this guy. And it was just like, he's going to be one of our best players. Like, you need to understand this. And I remember that 2010 state of Indiana class was not great, comparatively from what it was even the year before, where they got a lot of guys from the state with Hulls and Elston. In 2009, it wasn't as deep in 2010. And a lot of those guys, the best players, were sort of already picked up, like Tyrone Johnson and Deshaun Thomas were pretty good players in that class. And I think they were already, basically committed by the time that Tom took the job. And it was sort of like, okay, like how far down this list do you want me to go, rather than take this guy who's obviously really good in DC who wants to come play for us? What are you thinking here? And it's a balance for those guys. And then obviously, it more, close at hand than I do, seeing what the coaches go through is in terms of recruiting out there and having then to justify it, which is a bizarre thing to say. Like, you've got to justify going to get a guy from DeMatha Catholic, one of the best programs in the country, over, in the history of high school basketball in the United States. It's not an easy sell, and you have to be like, this is why I wanted this guy. And I think everybody was in love with him after a year. I mean, I think everybody loved Will and Vic by the halfway point of their freshman year. Everybody was kind of sold. But I remember like people talking about, well, they should have gone to recruit Donnie Hale. Whatever happened to Donnie Hale? Like, I'm sure, he played a little bit with Purdue. I think he transferred, it's like, and Victor Oladipo is, I mean, he's hurting, but he's going to collect a $9.5 million paycheck in the NBA this year. And who knows if he's even going to play. But that's the kind of career that he built, obviously. So it's amazing just how, you look back at those stories and who makes it, who doesn't, and who was complained about at the time and who wasn't. And, it is bizarre to see. It's fascinating to see how fan bases react to all that.
Well, it was interesting to me. One, Victor Oladipo got National Player of the Year, averaging 13 points a game. Mm-hmm. And the second thing was, and our good friend, God bless him, Terry Hutchins.
Well, I wrote his name down just to bring him up next to you.
Yeah, Terry. I think Terry wrote something because Cody was such an unselfish teammate. Mm-hmm. Everybody else got better because of him, because a lot of the focus was on him. And I remember Terry writing something that was, semi-critical of Cody. And, because Cody was the favorite for preseason National Player of the Year. And yet Victor kind of stepped up and became that guy, mostly because of his defense. Right. He was the National Defensive Player of the Year that year. But what I remember the most, when it came down to winning the program's first Big Ten title outright in 20 plus years, in the last 51 seconds of the game at Michigan, it was Cody Zeller who got it done both offensively and defensively. He scored the last 6 points, defended on that last, attempt by Burke. And then the one thing that may never be talked about, I think when Morgan went up for the tip, Yogi got a fingertip on that tip. And, Yogi is not talked about enough in the lore of Indiana basketball, in my mind, because he played for 2 championship teams and had different roles on both. And Yogi and I would say Trace had 2 of the best senior seasons and benefited from playing 4 years at Indiana. Those guys, I'll take those 2 anytime. And I wish Yogi were around a little bit more. I know he's playing professionally overseas, had some time in the NBA, but I think he's undervalued as far as what he contributed to the Indiana basketball program in his 4 years.